I fear not the dark itself, but what may lurk within it. Welcome to Lurk, bringing you creepy, strange, and bone-chilling stories, with your host, Jamie Jackson.
Hey lurkers, welcome to this month's True Crime Stab and Gab episode. Honestly, I don't think there's a true crime story that could be a better fit for this particular podcast than this story. Today, we're heading deep into the mountains of California to look at one of the strangest missing person cases we've ever covered here on Lurk. And we've covered a few strange ones. It's a story about a 16-year-old girl who disappeared during a trip into the Sierra Nevada. A man who came back out of the mountains without her, and an explanation so bizarre that it would be easy to dismiss this entire story as nothing more than a strange piece of Bigfoot lore. Yes, I said Bigfoot. Except this wasn't just a story about Bigfoot. This is the story of what happened to a 16-year-old girl named Theresa Ann Bier, who disappeared in June of 1987. Theresa had gone into the mountains with a 43-year-old man named Russell Skip Welch, a man fascinated by the legend of Sasquatch and who believed there was something living in those California mountains. Theresa was supposed to come back, but she didn't. And when investigators began asking Welch where she had gone, the story they heard wasn't exactly what you might expect. His explanation changed. The location of the campsite became questionable. Investigators began to suspect that the scene they had been shown had been staged, and eventually, Welch claimed that Theresa had been taken by something in the woods, something he identified as Bigfoot. Was Theresa really taken by something unknown? Was Bigfoot simply an excuse created to explain what happened to a teenage girl? Did Theresa become lost somewhere in that enormous wilderness? Or did something much more human and much more sinister happened to her? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, if Theresa didn't leave those mountains alive, where is she? Almost 40 years have passed since Theresa walked into the Sierra Nevada. Her family has never gotten the answers they deserved. Her body has never been found, and despite all the theories, all the searching, and all the years that have passed, we still don't know what happened to her. So tonight we're going back to June of 1987. We're going into the California mountains with a 16-year-old girl who thought she was going on an adventure. And we're going to follow the trail she left behind until it disappears completely into the wilderness. Because somewhere between the last time Theresa was seen and the moment she vanished, something happened. And whatever that something was, it has remained hidden for almost 4 decades. So turn down the lights, settle in, and keep your eyes on the tree line, because tonight we're going into the woods looking for Theresa Ann Bier. And we're going to find out what happened to the girl who disappeared, and the Bigfoot story that followed her into the darkness. So let's get lurking. I went back and forth with exactly how I should structure this episode, as far as what or who to begin with. There's just so much going on here, in my opinion at least, and I wanted to make sure I had things structured just right. So first, let me tell you about our setting, the Sierra Nevada mountains. The Sierra Nevada is a majestic mountain range in the western United States, stretching about 400 miles across California and Nevada. It is home to Yosemite National Park, Lake Tahoe, and Mount Whitney, which is the highest peak in the contiguous United States, at 14,505 feet. The range is known for granite cliffs, giant sequoia forest, and pristine alpine lakes. The specific area we're focusing on is an area known as Shut-Eye Peak. The area surrounding Shut-Eye Peak is part of the vast Sierra Nevada mountain range, a landscape that can feel almost impossibly remote once you leave the communities and paved roads behind. Rising above California's Central Valley, the mountains here are covered in enormous stretches of pine and fir forest, broken by steep ridges, rocky slopes, deep ravines, and narrow mountain roads that wind their way through the trees. Shut-Eye Peak itself rises to more than 8,300 feet above sea level, sitting along Chiquito Ridge in the Sierra National Forest, and the higher you climb, the more rugged and isolated the terrain becomes. This is not a landscape of wide open fields where you can see for miles in every direction. The forest can be thick with towering trees, fallen timber, brush, and uneven ground, while granite and quartz monzonite outcroppings interrupt the forest and create steep, rocky sections of terrain. The mountains are crisscrossed by ridges and drainages, with creeks, meadows, and high-elevation lakes scattered throughout the backcountry. The terrain is complicated, with dozens of small waterways, mountain passes, meadows, lakes, roads, and trails spread across the high country. Near the summit of Shut-Eye Peak, the terrain is steep and technical, with exposed rock along the approaches to the lookout, and from the top there are enormous views across the surrounding Sierra. But those sweeping views can be deceptive, because between the high ridges are countless folds in the landscape, canyons, ravines, and heavily wooded slopes that can completely hide what lies only a short distance away. There's also a long history of human activity hidden within these mountains. Old logging roads, former camps, mining prospects, and remnants of earlier mountain settlements are scattered throughout the region. But despite those traces of human activity, this remains a vast and rugged wilderness. A person traveling through the area can move from a relatively accessible forest road into steep, rocky country where the trees close in, the ground becomes uneven, and visibility can disappear almost completely. A ridge can block the view of a valley below, a stand of trees can conceal a trail, and a drainage can lead down into the country that cannot be seen from the road above. And that's what makes the Sierra Nevada such a striking place. From a distance, the mountains can look majestic and almost peaceful, with their enormous forest and granite peaks rising against the sky. But on the ground, especially away from the roads and developed areas, they are immense, complicated, and sometimes unforgiving. A maze of ridges, forests, rocks, ravines, and hidden places stretching for miles in every direction. A person who disappeared from a trail or campsite could potentially be extremely difficult to locate from the ground. And this wasn't a part of California completely unfamiliar with stories of Bigfoot. I do want to jump in here really quick and say I am going to touch on Bigfoot. Bigfoot is a part of this story, but I don't want you to take Bigfoot as the main focus of this story, because he's not. Throughout the Sierra Nevada, reports of large hair-covered creatures have been made for generations, and there are documented sightings scattered throughout the surrounding counties and mountain communities. In Madera County itself, there are recorded reports dating back decades, including one from the Bass Lake area in 1988, when two hunters reported seeing a large figure moving through the trees. Whether those encounters represent sightings of an unknown animal, misidentifications, or something else entirely, the stories have become part of the mythology of these mountains. And in June of 1987, the search for that creature was precisely what had brought two people deep into this particular stretch of the Sierra Nevada. But before we talk about Sasquatch, before we talk about mysterious creatures in the Sierra Nevada, before we get into the stories that have surrounded this case for almost 40 years, I want to start with the person who too often gets lost underneath all of that. This is what I mean about the focus. Let's not focus on Bigfoot. Let's focus on the girl who went missing. I want to tell you about Theresa Ann Bier. Theresa was 16 years old in 1987. She had brown hair, hazel eyes, stood about 5 feet 5 inches tall, and weighed approximately 110 pounds. She had a surgical scar on her lower right leg from a childhood fracture, and authorities noted that her upper front teeth protruded slightly. On the day she disappeared, she was reportedly wearing blue jeans, a white t-shirt, and lace sandals. Those are the kinds of details you find in a missing person database: height, weight, hair color, clothing, scars. But none of those things tell us who Theresa actually was. And that's where this story gets particularly sad. because the available accounts of Theresa's life suggest that she had already experienced an extraordinary amount of instability and trauma before she ever walked into those California mountains. And when we talk about missing people, I think it's important to remember that they don't suddenly appear on the day they disappear. They have birthdays, they have favorite things, they have friends, they have arguments with their parents, they have dreams, they have terrible days and wonderful days, they make mistakes, they fall in love, they get angry, they laugh, they have entire lives that exist before the moment they become a photograph on a missing person poster. And Theresa was no different. But Theresa never really had an easy life. Her parents, Shirley and David Bier, had 3 daughters, Yolanda, Vicky, and Theresa. The oldest, Yolanda, was born in 1966, when Shirley was still a teenager and David was serving in Vietnam. Shirley wasn't really interested in being a mother, which led to Yolanda going to live with David's grandmother, Mary Bier, until he returned to the States. But David said he just didn't like the way his wife Shirley treated Yolanda, so she went to live with her great-grandmother. Then they went on to have 2 more daughters, Vicky, and then on April 16, 1971, Theresa was born. Their mother Shirley was abusive. At just 3 years old, Theresa was admitted to the hospital after her mother had wrapped her leg around the slats of the crib and twisted it until it broke. While at the hospital, doctors also discovered several broken ribs from a different beating. Remember, Theresa was just 3 years old when this happened. Social services removed the 2 daughters, Vicky and Theresa, and placed them in foster care. They eventually went to live with a woman named Sylvia Pierce, who knew the girls from church. They lived with her for several years and had a much more normal life. But then their father, David Bier, remarried, and he wanted his girls back. At that time, Shirley, their mother, who suffered from mental health issues, had moved to Arizona and was completely out of the picture. David Bier's new wife was a woman named Margie Richmond, and get ready to pay attention to this particular relationship because it's somewhat complicated. She was the ex-wife of Shirley Bier's, Shirley was the mother of the girls, half-brother John Richmond. So Margie Richmond's ex-husband is the biological half-uncle to Theresa and her sisters, and Margie was an aunt by marriage, but was now their stepmother. Sadly, this living arrangement was not ideal. Margie was also abusive in that she would withhold food. She actually had their refrigerator locked and would eat food in front of the girls, but not give them any. They ended up going to live with their older sister Yolanda and their great-grandmother Mary Bier. Vicky, at some point, ran away to go live on the streets. And Theresa, when she arrived at her great-grandmother's house, was so malnourished that Mary Bier took her to the doctor. I think that if Theresa had been able to stay with Mary, her life would have been decent, even with Mary Bier being elderly. But she wouldn't remain at that house. John Richmond, her half-uncle, the ex-husband of her stepmother who starved her, takes over custody of Theresa. Motivation behind this probably had something to do with the small amount of money he could receive as a foster parent. But her uncle John Richmond wasn't a great person either. He was known as Blind Johnny and well known by local law enforcement. The name Blind Johnny came about because he claimed to have lost his sight. One story was that he lost it when he shot himself playing Russian roulette, and another story was that he shot himself when he was jilted by a woman who left him for Bing Crosby's son. But some people were convinced that he could actually see and was playing the part with his slicked back black hair and black sunglasses. Law enforcement knew him as a doper who fenced stolen property. And let me tell you, not sure how you can fence stolen property when you can't see the items that you're supposedly fencing, which is probably why people thought he could see. When John Richmond took Theresa in, he had 2 young sons, and Theresa made a convenient live-in babysitter, which is probably another reason he wanted to take her in. Also in the home was his wife and mother of his children, who was reportedly a prostitute and possibly also an exotic dancer. And he also had a 17-year-old live-in girlfriend named Tammy. That's right, he has a wife who is in the house, and he has a 17-year-old girlfriend also in the house. Definitely sounds like a much better place than her great-grandmother's. Sadly, according to Mary Bier, Theresa's great-grandmother, Theresa indicated that she was being molested by Johnny Richmond. Her sister Yolanda said Theresa indicated that he was forcing her to have sex with him, and not only that, but he would let some of his friends have sex with her as well. In addition, Johnny's live-in girlfriend Tammy, who was only a year older than Theresa, said that Theresa was quiet and withdrawn and often stayed in her room. Tammy also allegedly supported the claims that Theresa was being sexually assaulted in the home. So June 1987, Theresa was finishing her freshman year of high school. She was described by her teachers as being slow and immature despite her age, and was placed in special ed classes, though personally I question if her life of abuse and missing school to take care of her cousins didn't play a part in her slow learner label. And that brings us to the next person in this crazy story, Russell Skip Welch. Skip Welch was 43 years old, a known meth user, and a student of Bigfoot. He had 2 adult children, a daughter named Chandra and a son named Terry. He was a house painter, but he mostly lived off of disability checks, and after the death of his wife, he started spending more and more time in the woods of the Sierra Nevada to escape his grief. He claimed to have had multiple encounters with Bigfoot and even managed to have a meeting with the head of anthropology at Fresno State University. During this meeting, he showed the professor a large stack of photos claiming they contained proof of Bigfoot's existence. But the photos merely showed shadows. The professor stated, they were pictures of shadows in the lee of trees, rocks, shrubs taken in an alpine transitional landscape, such as you'll see in the Sierra, that the individual showing them claimed were Bigfoot. Each and every photo was the same. It was just shadow after shadow after shadow. I remember it was excruciating because each and every photograph was just a duplicate of the previous one. Skip Welch was adamant that the photos showed Bigfoot. The professor said that he didn't seem to be unstable, violent, or high, but something just seemed off about him. So much so that the professor wanted to end the meeting, and he didn't want to have any other meetings with him. A few days later, Welch dropped off a paper bag at the professor's office that contained bones he claimed were Bigfoot bones, but they were nothing more than cow bones. Skip Welch considered himself something of a wilderness guru, and he spent considerable time in an area of the Sierra Nevada called Ghost Canyon. Ghost Canyon is not the actual name of the place, but rather a name Skip had given it. He believed there was a Native American burial there, though I'm guessing that was just something he made up. So in the week before June 1st, 1987, Theresa told some friends at school that she was going to skip class on the 1st to go up in the mountains with a man to see Bigfoot. And on that Monday morning, June 1st, 1987, Blind Johnny woke up early to find Skip Welch at his house. Theresa was getting ready for school, though we know she wasn't really because she had already told her friends she was skipping that day to go hunt Bigfoot. Skip offers to take Theresa to school and off they go, Theresa carrying her school books with her. Later that morning, the school calls John Richmond to inform him that Theresa wasn't in attendance that day. Does Blind Johnny panic? Nope. He tells them she's at home sick, without skipping a beat. He later says he did this because he wanted to handle the matter himself. Sometime late morning, before heading to the mountains, Skip stops at his daughter's house. Skip's daughter was only a few years older than Theresa, and she wasn't shocked to see her dad with an underage girl, or to learn that they were going to the mountains to look for Bigfoot. At some point, Chandra asks Theresa if she does drugs, and Theresa tells her no. Chandra didn't have a good feeling despite Theresa saying she didn't do drugs. She was aware of her father's reputation of taking young girls to the mountains, getting them high, and then coercing them to do sex acts. But she didn't prevent them from going, and off they went. Later that evening, Blind Johnny started to get a bad feeling. I'm going to jump in here with my own personal comment. It took you until the evening to get a bad feeling when a 43-year-old man that you don't know very well shows up to take your 16-year-old niece to school. The school calls, says, hey, she's not at school, and it takes you until the evening to have a bad feeling? Really? Throughout the day, Blind Johnny was allegedly calling around trying to locate Theresa's whereabouts with no luck. I bet he was. It was 9:30 p.m. when John Richmond finally called the police to report Theresa missing. Detective Doug Stokes is assigned to the case. John Richmond admits telling the school Theresa was homesick and that he didn't get concerned about her safety until he had started calling around and learned just how weird this Skip guy really was. He alleges that he has only known Skip a short time, meeting him for the first time just the week prior to Theresa's disappearance. So Detective Stokes goes in search of Skip. He talks first with Blind Johnny's teenage girlfriend, Tammy, who is 17 and lives with her mom, but spends most of her nights with Johnny at his house. Her mom claims that she hates this, but she just can't do anything about it. Seems like there is a complete lack of parenting going on around here. It makes me want to scream. It literally made me want to scream. Because I grew up in this generation. I was 12 in 1987, and while there was a lack of parenting, so to speak, I mean, there literally was a commercial on TV at 10 p.m. every night that said, it's 10 p.m., do you know where your children are? Because parents needed to be reminded that they had children. There were latchkey kids, but my God, there is no way that I would have been able to disappear with a 43-year-old man. There's no way any of my friends would have been able to have that happen. Like somebody you don't know showing up saying, hey, I'll take your 16-year-old to school. Not happening. So John Richmond's girlfriend Tammy tells Detective Stokes that Skip is a meth addict and a self-proclaimed survivalist who frequents canyons past an area called Bass Lake. She also mentions that he has a part-time girlfriend named Michelle Ryan. Michelle is also 17 and had little to tell the detective, but insisted Skip was in no way her boyfriend, part-time or otherwise. Michelle does become slightly important near the end of the story. The detective then talks with a 20-year-old woman named Linnell, who was a former roommate of Skip's daughter, Chandra. She mentioned that she had recently traded cars with Skip, giving him her brown '76 Monte Carlo in exchange for his white Pinto. The detective also learns that Skip has a son named Terry, though Linnell was unable to give him any info on the whereabouts of Chandra, his daughter. Terry Welch, Skip's son, was 21 and said he had very little contact with his father. Terry told the police that his father had stopped by to see him and had a female with him who matched Theresa's description. He said that Theresa did not appear hurt and was able to come and go freely. He added that she seemed excited about being out of school and talked about going to the mountains. Detective Stokes was able to track down Skip's daughter through her brother Terry and speak with her. She admitted seeing Theresa with her father the day before and that Theresa was excited about going to the mountains. Shockingly, she also mentioned that it was rumored her dad took young girls to the woods and gave them drugs in order to get them to have sex with him. At this point, the U.S. Forest Service was contacted by police, and it was discovered that Welch had 4 mineral claims in his name in Madera County. In addition, the Madera County Sheriff said he knew Welch well, as he would often go up into the mountains to his claims, but would not return in the time frame that he said he would return, which prompted missing persons reports. The sheriff promised that he would keep an eye out for Welch. Forest Service special agents promised to have trailheads searched. On Friday, June 5th, Welch's Monte Carlo was found by sheriff's deputies, parked near a trailer park in the town of North Fork, which was a small community that was a gateway to the Shut-Eye Peak area of the Sierra Nevada. It was learned that he had been to visit a friend named Dorothy Davis, who lived behind the trailer park. She said Skip showed up and was upset and talking crazy, ranting about a girl who had been taken by a satanic group. Skip said he saw it happen and witnessed her being transformed into something different, something that was all white, but he didn't see her after it happened, and she must still be up there. Dorothy Davis assumed Skip Welch was high and delusional and ignored what he said because it was so out there she didn't think there was any truth to it. Honestly, I would probably assume the same. The sheriff's department did not search for Skip Welch the day his car was spotted, and didn't talk to Dorothy Davis until a week after they had seen his car. The car was gone when they went to speak with Davis. They also did not contact Detective Stokes until after speaking with Davis. On Tuesday, June 9th, John Richmond called the police, claiming that he had received a threatening call from a woman who he said sounded young. She said she was calling on behalf of Skip Welch and said, "You better stop talking to police and making trouble for Skip. And by the way, Skip has a gun." The caller also said if Johnny knew what was good for him, he would just tell police Skip picked Theresa up and took her to school, where he saw her leave with a blonde girl. On June 10th, Detective Stokes gets a call from Skip's son Terry, saying he knew where his father was. He was at his mother's house in Fresno. At that residence, Skip's family said when Skip arrived, he seemed very upset and that his car was banged up on both sides. He had gone directly to his bedroom and got under the covers of the bed and began rocking and shaking. This, apparently, was common behavior for Skip, and his mother thought, well, here he goes again. His mother sent Skip's brother into the room to make sure that the shotgun that was kept there was removed. When the brother entered the room, Skip lost it, screaming for his brother to leave, saying demons were in the room and that it wasn't safe. Skip was apprehended at his mother's residence. At this point, it had been 10 days since he left with Theresa. During questioning, Skip claimed he didn't know where Theresa was, that he had dropped her off at school that day. He talked a lot at first, but remained composed and in control, unless he was talking about Bigfoot. Then his eyes would become fixed and almost glaze over. Detective Stokes said it was almost like he was becoming a different person. In his notes, Detective Stokes wrote that Welch was very serious about the subject of Bigfoot and did not take it lightly at all. Actual notes from Detective Stokes read, "He spoke exclusively of his sightings of Bigfoot in the backcountry and high Sierras. He talked on and on regarding the facts that he had literally hundreds of sightings of Bigfoot, and that there was a community of Saskatchewans, as he referred to them, living in the high Sierras, numbering several hundreds to thousands." I don't think he meant people from Saskatchewan. I think he meant Sasquatchians or something. Bigfoot. The notes continue. He further stated that he had established a strong relationship with this community of Big Feet that lived in the Sierras, and that he had not violated them, and that therefore they made themselves readily available to him. Skip told the detective he wasn't pulling his leg or joking. He was very serious and claimed he had a bunch of photos. Obviously, the same photos the anthropology head at Fresno State University debunked. When the conversation circled back to Theresa, Skip had several explanations. He said he didn't call Theresa by her name. He called her Sam, because Theresa reminded him of a homeless girl named Sam he saw in a movie once. He then claimed that on the morning of June 1st, he and Theresa drove around a bit after picking her up, and she was complaining to him about how unhappy she was in her living situation. Then he took her to school, where they were greeted by a blonde girl. Theresa told Skip that the blonde girl was going to help keep her hidden, presumably when she ran away. It seems as though Skip was setting up the blonde girl's story, as mentioned in that alleged threatening call to John Richmond. Skip continues saying Theresa told him the blonde girl was going to take her away and help keep her hidden because of her terrible home life. After this, Skip said he hung out in Fresno all day and he never went to the mountains. He told the detective he would never take a girl into the mountains because he was well versed in the dangers there. Detective Stokes asked why Skip's car was seen in North Fork. And then suddenly Skip remembers, "Oh, yeah, I did go to the mountains," after dropping Theresa off. He insisted he was alone and that several rangers could back him up. Then the detective asked why both his kids said they saw Skip with Theresa that day, and he changes his story several times. One story was that Theresa went off with some other campers. Another story was that she ran off with a biker gang after they saw her admiring their bikes. Eventually, Skip lands on his final story. Detective Stokes' notes read, "He then continued by stating that he wanted me to know that there were super intelligent beings living in the high Sierras, along with Bigfoot, and the Bigfoot was actually the bodyguard for the super intelligent community of people. These people existed, but he's only made 1 or 2 sightings prior to this occasion." He stated that where Bigfoot was hairy-bodied and approximately 10 to 11 feet tall, these super-intelligent beings looked much more human and were of super-intelligence. He then continued by stating that the missing person, Theresa Bier, had in fact run off with one of these super-intelligent beings, someone who appeared to be female with blonde hair and approximately the same age and size as Theresa. I noted that during all of this conversation, Welch looked me continually straight in the eye and made no emotional indications that would seem to indicate that he believed he was playing a joke or relaying information to me that he did not, in some way, believe to be true. He also then stated that these individuals would not hurt Sam, Theresa, and he stated that he knew that he would never see her again. He stated that this whole community lived underground and that they seldom came out, but that they had such a beautiful society that once Sam, Theresa, was in the society, she would not want to come back, especially since she was so, word redacted, in her own home, that it was much better for her to remain with these people. It is believed that that redacted word or words were sexually molested. Welch mentioned that Bigfoot played mind games on him, and he said he had looked for Theresa all that first day but never found her. When he returned to the car to leave, it was stuck, and while trying to get the car out of the rut it was stuck in, he claimed he looked back and saw something like a man, but not a man, in the back seat. The detective's notes continue. He stated that this was a spirit or some type of devil that was holding the car up off the ground. He stated that he then was able to maneuver the car and get loose from this thing that was holding his car in place, and he began to drive out of the mountain area, wanting to get to the North Fork area. As he was driving, looking through the rear-view mirror, he then observed what appeared to be the face of a man in the back seat of his vehicle. He became extremely upset and scared. He stated that he could feel that this was the devil in the back seat. He turned and physically began to strike at this thing that was in the back seat, and states that he struck through this spirit and hit his knuckles several times on a wooden speaker that was in the back seat of his vehicle. Detective Stokes did note that the knuckles on Welch's right hand were scraped up with small nicks and scratches. Skip was able to overcome this evil entity by rebuking it in the name of Jesus Christ. Then he drove to Dorothy Davis's house in North Fork. Skip claimed he went up to the mountains again the next day to search for Theresa and saw her running through the trees with the blonde girl, but she wouldn't come or answer him when he called her. Another interesting section of the detective's notes state, he then stated without any questioning on my part that if we did in fact find her, we would find that there was no evidence of any sexual abuse by him with the missing person. He then laughed, which was the first emotion that he had shown during the interview, and stated that he had had plenty of opportunities to have sex with Sam, Theresa, and that she was very willing to have sex with him, not that he was going to have sex with a young girl, because that was not in his nature. After the interrogation, Skip agreed to take investigators to the campsite the following day. On that day, as they made their way to look for the campsite, Skip Welch claimed to see Bigfoot and also Sam, Theresa, running through the trees. Detectives saw neither. They did find a camp with a smoldering campfire and blankets hung in a formation. They also found a camera and purse and clothing that was obviously female. They also discovered Polaroid photos in the purse. The photos were of the countryside along with a photo of Welch playing the guitar and some photos of Theresa. So at first glance, this looks like the campsite where Skip Welch took Theresa. Even the photos seem to look like the same place. But the deputies from Madera County Sheriff's Department look at everything and are able to determine that the mountain in the background of the photos, while similar, is not the mountain that's in the background at the campsite. The photos were of a different area. Bottom line, Skip Welch fabricated a campsite in a location 20 miles from the approximate area the photos had been taken, and he made it to look identical to what was portrayed in the Polaroids. Think about the effort that would take to completely stage a totally different campsite 20 miles from where the real campsite was, to find a mountain that was similar enough that some detectives would look and be like, yep, that's the right mountain, that's the same mountain in the background. And it took people who were intimately familiar with the area to determine that's not the same mountain. It's sort of similar, but it's not the same. I mean, that takes massive amount of premeditation. So the search effort for Theresa included a California Highway Patrol helicopter equipped with infrared technology. Back then, it was the only infrared-equipped helicopter in the state, and police were hopeful that they would certainly be able to find Theresa with it. Tracking dogs were also brought in, and search parties were organized by the Forest Service. On June 11, 1987, following the trip to the phony campsite, Skip Welch was booked on 2 charges. A misdemeanor charging that he knowingly removed a 16-year-old victim from the area, and the victim was truant from school. And a more serious charge that without legal authority, he removed 16-year-old from Fresno County and kept victim concealed from guardians. The search efforts intensified. June 12th, Madera County Sheriff's Department, along with a mounted posse, tracking dogs, infrared air support, returned to the search. Welch's Monte Carlo was searched. Calls came in from Welch's family, with them stating that they believed Theresa was dead and buried in the mountains somewhere. Welch's nephew suggested the police talk to a girl named Michelle Ryan. You'll remember police did talk to her, as she was said to be his part-time girlfriend, though she said absolutely not. Michelle went to Ghost Canyon with Skip, but was also accompanied by 2 other male friends who went for her protection. In the dead of the night, Michelle woke up and saw what she says was a total devil. It was a white, 3-foot-tall, ugly face and big eyes. She started yelling, "He's going to kill me," and ran off towards a cliff, and was stopped by one of her friends. Michelle told detectives she didn't feel much like talking about Skip Welch and the things that happened in Ghost Canyon. She believed she had been drugged. Another odd story came from Skip Welch's nephew, who told police about a trip to Ghost Canyon he took with his uncle. He said that in the canyon, Skip showed him a rock that had odd markings on it, and Skip said it was a sacrificial design. His nephew said, he stated that a woman's hands needed to be tied behind her head and off to the side when she was laid across the rock on her back, and it was here that she was presented as a sacrifice to the devil gods. It was the nephew who tried to talk Michelle Ryan out of going to the canyon with Skip, and he also convinced the other 2 men to go to look out for her when she still decided to go. And the nephew agreed with the other family members about Skip's interest in underage girls, and that it was rumored for years that he took young women to the mountains and did it because Bigfoot worshipped women. He thought it was worship in a positive way, but he admitted that now he suspected it was more in a sacrificial manner. By mid-June, the search for Theresa became stagnant. The search was limited to periodic checks and asking visitors to be on the lookout for her. At the beginning of October 1987, Skip was released. The charges for child stealing dropped by the DA because they felt charges of homicide may be forthcoming, and the DA's office didn't want the minor charges to cause an issue with additional charges being brought. There was concern that the defense may claim double jeopardy if they charged him with child stealing. A little more than 10 years after Theresa's disappearance, Skip Welch died March 1998 of severe coronary artery disease. And interestingly, 5 years after the disappearance, Blind Johnny, John Richmond, Theresa's uncle, did an interview with the Fresno Bee and said, "I loved that child. She was just starting out in life and this had to happen. Man, she's dead, or she's been sold into slavery. No one could be gone that long and not get in touch with her family." I find the "she's been sold into slavery" comment to be incredibly odd and maybe a little telling, because I'm not so sure Blind Johnny is completely blameless in all of this. Sometime in 2008, Blind Johnny died of cancer. To date, no trace of Theresa has been found. For everyone who knew Theresa, this wasn't a weird mystery. It wasn't a paranormal story. It wasn't a strange headline. It was a 16-year-old girl who went into the mountains and never came home. Her family had to live with that uncertainty. There was no funeral, there was no grave, there was no confirmed final moment. There was no answer to the most basic question a family can ask: where is she? And that question has remained unanswered for almost 40 years. And because prosecutors had dismissed the child stealing case, Welch was never convicted of anything relating to Theresa's disappearance. Which means that whatever Russell Welch knew, he took that knowledge to the grave. Unless, of course, he told somebody else. And that's one of the most frustrating aspects of cold cases. Sometimes the person who knows the answer is sitting in a prison cell. Sometimes they're still living somewhere. Sometimes they're dead. And sometimes the only person who knows what happened is the person who disappeared. It's easy to understand why people remember the Bigfoot part of this case. 16-year-old girl disappears in the California mountains and the man she's with says Bigfoot took her. That's a headline. That's a podcast episode. That's a story that people will remember. But underneath that headline is a teenage girl who had a difficult life, who was taken into the wilderness by an adult man, who disappeared under circumstances that remain unexplained, and whose family has never been given the answers they deserve. And that's why I think Theresa's name deserves to be separated from the creature that became attached to her story. Because Theresa was not the girl Bigfoot took. She was Theresa Ann Bier. She was 16 years old. She was someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's friend. And she should have had the chance to grow up. She should have had the chance to make mistakes that didn't matter, fall in love with the wrong person, fall in love with the right person, graduate, get a job, move somewhere new, change her mind, change her hair, become someone completely different from the girl she was at 16. Instead, her life stopped in the Sierra Nevada, and we don't know why. So, did Bigfoot take Theresa Bier? Could I sit here and tell you with absolute certainty that Bigfoot had nothing to do with Theresa's disappearance? I can't. None of us were standing in those mountains that evening. None of us know everything that happened. But what I can tell you is that there's no physical evidence demonstrating that Sasquatch abducted Theresa. In fact, the Bigfoot explanation comes from Russell Welch, a meth addict who was most likely high in the mountains where he took her. And that's important, because the same man who told investigators Bigfoot took Theresa had previously given other explanations for why she wasn't there. Investigators believed the campsite he showed them was staged. They suspected foul play. They charged him with child stealing, and prosecutors dismissed that charge because they wanted to preserve the possibility of charging him with murder if Theresa's body was ever found. So personally, when I look at this case, I don't think the biggest mystery is whether Bigfoot exists. I think the biggest mystery is what happened to Theresa after she entered those mountains with Skip Welch. Because somewhere between Fresno and the Sierra Nevada, somewhere between a 16-year-old's excitement about searching for Bigfoot and the moment she disappeared, something happened. And whatever that something was, Theresa never came home. There's one image from this case that keeps coming back to me. Not a footprint, it's not a photograph, it's not some strange creature standing between the trees. It's a man walking out of the mountains alone. Because somewhere behind him was a 16-year-old girl who had gone in the wilderness with him. And he came back without her. Theresa is still missing. The California Department of Justice continues to list her as missing, with the Fresno Police Department as the investigating agency. So today we've gone into the Sierra Nevada looking for something that may or may not exist. We followed the story of a man who said a legendary creature took a teenage girl. We've looked at the changing explanations, the suspicious campsite, the search, the arrest, the dismissed charges, and the theories that have followed this case for nearly 40 years. And after all of that, we're still left standing in the same place, with questions, lots of questions, and one missing girl. But until someone finds Theresa, until someone finds evidence, until someone finally tells the truth, we simply don't know. And perhaps that's the most frightening thing about this case. Because the scariest monsters aren't always the ones hiding somewhere in the woods. Sometimes they're the people who walk into those woods with us. That's going to do it for this episode of Lurk. You can find Lurk wherever it is that you find your favorite podcast, like Spotify or iHeartRadio, or at lurkpodcast.com, where you'll also find our blog along with some other information. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a 5-star review and make sure that you tell your friends. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, so make sure you join us there. Until next time, lurkers, stay out of the dark places, keep your eyes open, question the stories you're told, and if you ever decide to go searching for something strange in the wilderness, make sure you know exactly who you're going with. And as always, keep lurking.